Hey everybody, it's Jenny from GrowthMode Marketing. You're listening to Demand Gen Fix, the podcast where our team of growth moders and our guests discuss the ins and outs of demand generation and why we believe it's the key to long-term sustainable growth, especially in the HR tech industry. Hey everybody, welcome to the Demand Gen Fix with GrowthMode Marketing. We're going to be talking today about the way that B2B prospect buy has evolved. That means marketing strategies have to evolve too. Today, we're digging in to look at just how buying behaviors have changed in the past few years and what that means for marketers. Because as the tried and true marketing tactics lose steam, we've got to look for different ways to engage those elusive buyers. Deanna and I are super excited to have a guest with us today. Eric Eden is a seasoned B2B CMO with experience in the software as a service and fintech arenas. He's currently an executive in residence with Information Venture Partners, where he advises portfolio companies on marketing and growth strategies. Welcome to the Demand Gen Fix, Eric. We're happy to have you.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Deanna, let's talk about the way that B2B prospect buy has evolved.
Yeah, it is definitely evolving. And Eric, I'd love to hear what you're seeing in the market. But the things that we're seeing is that people are just less likely to engage with sales reps early on in the buying process. And they're coming to the table more informed on their options. And ultimately, I think what that shakes down to is they're no longer willing to be pulled into a vendor's sales process. They're now wanting to research and get the information and do things on their own timeline. And so they want to control it and kind of invite the vendors into their buying process instead of being pulled into that sales process.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Some of the research that Forrester has put out this year is just that 80% of the B2B buying process is done before people even talk to the sales team for the first time. So that's like, putting a number behind it gives you sort of a sense for like people's behavior and how they're thinking about it. I've seen that in practice, that people just don't want to engage with sales reps because they want to get confidence that they're not spending time on something that isn't the right solution. And I think the reason for this is a fascinating psychological thing, is when people are buying things for their company, they're afraid if it doesn't work out, they're going to get fired. So they seek to go get recommendations from other people who have their similar job at other companies to find out, what did you do? Did it work? Because they're trying to make sure before they talk to any supplier that it's going to be good for their career. And like, I've seen that actually happen where people bought things for their company. It was really expensive. It didn't work out and they lost their job because of it. And that's the way the world works. And it's very unfortunate. So it makes sense that this shift is sort of happening.
Yeah, and I think people are more resistant to engaging early with the sales rep because they know the sales rep, like end of the month, end of the quarter, end of the year, like they've got quotas to meet. And sometimes they can be pretty aggressive because they're trying to push deals forward. And quite frankly, like as a B2B buyer myself, there are times where I go and I look up a different technology that's out there because I'm interested in it. And I think, in the future, I'd like to get it, and I do quite a bit of digging on and understanding it, but I'm not ready to buy, and I might not be ready for 6 months or a year. I'm just kind of gathering information to know what the options are. And I think there's a lot of buyers out there. They're like, I don't want to spend the time talking to these sales rep because I'm not actually in market, even though I, have been reading your content and clicking on it.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, having had the chief marketing officer title for a long time, I get chased every day by 20, 30 different salespeople sending me emails. And the reality is 99% of them are just not good. And I hate to say that is the case, but it's sort of disappointing. But when you see people don't engage with it, a lot of those emails, like almost none of them have an offer of any kind. They just say, can you give me 15 minutes of your time? And they're not offering me anything. And I'm like, no. No, I can't give you 15 minutes of my time for free if you're not offering me anything of value. It could be content. It doesn't have to be like an incentive. It could be content. It could be, an assessment or, a sort of a consultation where I get some advice on a certain topic that they're experts on. But very few people even make the effort to offer anything of value. They just walk into a conversation and they want to tell you all about themselves, and they haven't even looked at your website, and they don't say anything to make you feel like in the email that you get that you're not just one of a million people who got this email.
I totally agree. I get those emails too. And it's just like delete, 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 or, the phone calls, delete, delete, delete. I don't know this number. I'm not going to listen to that. It's just the cold calling and the cold emailing and stuff. It just doesn't work.
A lot of people are doing it. It must be working for somebody, right? And maybe it makes sense to have it as part of your overall marketing mix. But I feel like the inbox is getting fuller quicker these days. So many cold outreach, and it really is like the SDR type of outreach where, to your point, Eric, it's not necessarily customized. You can tell it's a mass blast that probably went out to 10,000 people. That's like a series of emails, and some of them are comical because they're all going from the same playbook, and some of them it's like clearly you're using the same type of templates and the same tactics where it's like, Deanna, I can tell you must not be interested in growing revenue because you haven't responded to me. Or, Deanna, I talked to so-and-so who said I should reach out to you. It's like, I have no idea who that is. You didn't talk to so-and-so who said reach out to me. Like, it's just interesting, all the different tactics that organizations are trying as they're trying to kick up revenue. And I think, this year, especially in the tech space, and we do a lot of work in the HR tech space specifically, revenue is down. Companies are behind on hitting those revenue targets that they're trying to achieve. And those that are responsible for setting the appointments and moving sales along, they're just kind of doubling down on things that have traditionally maybe worked in a past life that are less and less effective. And I think the reality is that some marketing and sales strategies aren't as impactful as they used to be.
In previous years, like 5-10 years ago, brute force worked a lot better. You could send out hundreds of thousands of emails and you would get, a pretty good, response rate. But like brute force doesn't work because people get so much of it, like you're saying. The other reason is because when the economy is challenging and people are less in buying mode, brute force works even less because the majority of people are not in the market to buy stuff. If they're laying people off, they're not going to be buying like solutions or software or tech, right? So it makes it a more difficult environment. And I think people just have to understand that trend so they can adapt their strategy. So offering people something of value, whether it's content or other things, like it's important.
Yep. And our crew talks about that all the time, Eric. If you're not in market to buy, let's say you're selling a $50,000 a year software, you're not going to be convinced based off of an email to suddenly go and buy for it. Like if you're not in market, you're not in market unless that cost is low enough that it's an easy decision to make. That doesn't mean you ignore what would normally be the 95% of companies that are not currently in market. Now it's probably 99% are not currently in market as companies pull back their budgets. You've got to build that brand awareness and trust with them, especially knowing, like you said, that statistic that came out of Forrester. Gartner has had a very similar statistic that says up to 80% of that purchase decision process is completed before they're willing to engage with a sales rep if it's a B2B sale. You're not going to make the short list, quite frankly, if they don't know you exist. So you've got to balance that marketing. It doesn't solve the problem of we need leads, we need them yesterday by any means. But if you're bringing a ton of leads in the door through these cold calling and email blast tactics and they're not in market, you're not going to get anywhere anyway. That's just hard, cold truth. And it's not easy to be an SDR or a salesperson these days. I mean, but the market is what it is, and buyers are going to do what buyers want to do.
Yeah. I think even post-COVID, like an example of offering something of value to somebody is one company I worked for, we did more than 1,000 lunch events per year. And the offer was lunch. And the subject line of the email was steak, ? Surprisingly, that worked, sort of like the timeshare thing of where they offer, you a free weekend, and then they pitch you on buying the timeshare, and people go to that. They're like, I'm never going to buy it, but I'm going to take the free weekend. And then someone always ends up buying the timeshare. So
Yeah.
same thing with like the lunches is like, we throw these lunches, it was disguised as thought leadership. It was mostly like a sales pitch. And every lunch, we get 40 or 50 people there, and every lunch someone would buy. But there was an offer. People were like, I'm going to go get this lunch. It's worth somewhere like $50 to $75. And I'm going to enjoy the lunch.
Yeah.
I'm not going to buy, but we convinced them in that hour. And that's what it's supposed to be, is you make an offer of value, people that engage with you, and then you had to convince them. And so I think if more people did that, then it would be a much better place. But 99% of like what I get is disappointingly, I'm like, what is this?
Yeah, I just saw some statistics that somebody on LinkedIn threw out this morning. I think it was research from SalesLoft that said it takes 1,000 emails to get one appointment these days, and that the cold calling rates, if you pick up the phone, was even lower than that. So they were saying essentially the average SDR now can find 5 appointments a month. So 60 appointments a year. Let's say 50% of those get qualified. So now you've got 30 appointments. I'm not a math major, so don't yell at me if my math is wrong here. And then how many of those actually close? So at the end of the day, this whole LinkedIn thing was talking about like the SDR model and how much it costs for an SDR versus if you were selling a $50,000 average per year software, that you were basically making like, I want to say it was 100,000 off of that one employee in a year, but that didn't account for the sales rep and the account manager and, all the other pieces that go into the cost of bringing in business, like the marketing and all that. So it's really interesting because no matter how many calls you make a day, no matter how many email blasts you send out, it's no longer this pure numbers game like it used to be. It used to be gate some content, collect the names, we get the MQLs, we pass them to sales. They work it. There's a math equation behind it. If we get this many leads in the door, we're going to get this much sales.
Yeah, I think the brute force SDR approach, going on to 1,000 people to get an appointment seems like a lot of brain damage. I think people just need to, take a more inspired, approach. Like one thing I did last year when we're selling a product that was $50,000 is we put together a dinner for a private table at one of the best restaurants in New York City per se. And so it's like a Michelin-star restaurant. Obama used to go there for dinner when he was president. We were like, okay, we're going to get 10 prospects to come because people would value this as like a $500 dinner per person. And it's worth $500 to get in front of an executive at a prospect company that can be a $50,000 client. And we threw this dinner, we got 10 people to show up, and we got like a third of them to buy. So that's a much more inspired campaign than just, blasting 1,000 people and saying, can I have 15 minutes of your time to pitch you?
How did you decide on the 10 prospects to invite to this dinner?
They were our target accounts. So we obviously had named accounts and target accounts. I actually did it in a number of cities. I did one dinner like that in New York. I did one dinner like that in London. We did one in Boston. So I think we did like 5 or 10 cities. We did that. And we just were really thoughtful of like getting executives to come who were decision makers at the prospect company. And it really worked. The inspiration of it was not only did we get people to show up, but people spent 3 hours with us, not being on their phone, dedicated to the conversation. And you'd never get that from just trying to get someone on a Zoom call. Like they're like half paying attention for 20 minutes, right? So it's a very different dynamic. And so I think people just have to think of more creative approaches to have success in today's environment. And I think a lot of companies are it's like they're not even trying. They're just sort of lazy about, I'm just going to blast people. And LinkedIn is like terrible these days. You get, just every day, just garbage, spewed at you. And I really hate it when they'll start messaging me and then they'll message me garbage like 7 days in a row. And I've never responded. I'm like, that's really obnoxious when people do that. Like, did you read my email below? Like, it's really terrible. Like, it's I give this email a 0 out of 10.
Plus, I think a lot of that
Yeah.
stuff is automated, honestly. I mean, you know, LinkedIn gives you all the automated little responses and follow-ups that you can click on. I think that's all people are doing is click, click, click. They're not even thinking about it.
Really ruins your reputation, though, when you do that,
Yep.
your company's reputation, you know?
So aside from food, we should talk about some other strategies that marketing teams can do to really like evolve their strategy and work within this new buying world.
Yeah, I mean, I love to eat, so I just go to the food examples, but there are some other really good solutions out there. So I've used some of the tools like Sendoso or Alice or Thanks, where basically you ask someone to meet with you and they get to pick, you know, a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And Alice is actually kind of cool because it looks at the person's social media and it recommends something. Like if they went to college at like the University of Akron, like I did, it would recommend like, oh, you can get a University of Akron sweatshirt, right? And they do the fulfillment and they ship it out. And I've used platforms like that. Incentives work. So it's like, would you pay $100 for someone to get, you know, a gift of their choice to meet with you? Like I worked with a company last year and they set up 1,000 meetings doing that over the course of a year. So it was like the number one way that they got meetings.
I'd be curious to see their statistics around how many of those actually closed and how long it took to close those. Because a lot of times I think like organizations will be like, we'll give you a $100 gift card if you see our demo. Well, there's going to be a lot of people that are just like, I'll take a $100 gift card. I have no interest in buying. I'm not in market, but they'll go and do that. And a lot of organizations, like we've talked to prospects before where they're like, I just need them to see a demo. I'm like, well, why do they need to see a demo? Like, what is the driving factor there? They're like, well, our close rate is really good if we can just get them to a demo. That's not really true, though, when you dig in a lot of times.
The caveat here is if you choose who you offer the incentive to wisely. What I have seen across multiple companies, across multiple industries is with a really good, curated, thoughtful list of targets, I've been able to achieve like 15% of those people buy.
So you really know who your ideal customer profile is.
Yeah, like I wouldn't recommend blasting stuff like that out just randomly to a list you bought from one of the data providers or something, but like, you know, if you have named accounts and you're like, you know who the 2 or 3 people are at each named account you really want a meeting with, that's like a great tactic. There's execution to it because what the incentive is really doing is it's not that people will take a meeting just because of the incentive. It's more like they would have looked at it, but it might have taken them longer to prioritize getting to spending the time to see a demo, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really that's what a good incentive would do is it just prioritizes people's time to make time for the demo for something that they would probably be interested in. It's not going to get people who are not interested in your thing at all to come, and it's not really going to cause people to buy. You still have to do the job to sell. But I think they can be really helpful if executed well.
I'd probably go to the $500 dinner.
Right. Depends how lucrative that offer is.
I'll give you one more example. This is a different idea. It's not quite food, but I was working with this one software company who was selling software to accounting firms. And we decided on an incentive of we would offer the partner at the accounting firm, if they saw a demo, we would send them an espresso coffee machine. And that coffee machine would double the productivity of their practice from their employees through caffeine. But our software also doubles your productivity. And so it was an incentive that tied into our story of like productivity. And so you can get really creative. And I mean, we shipped like 200 espresso machines. Espresso's like, we don't have any more machines.
And those employees were then quadruply productive, right? Because they had the software and the caffeine.
And the espresso machines were like, I don't know, they were like $150, $200 for the model we were doing. But people were really appreciative of it. And it was a positive brand experience, even if for the people who didn't buy versus like just spam that doesn't offer you any value.
Yeah.
And we did get more than 15% when we did that program for the accounting firms. And like we were selling something that was more than $10,000. So I was happy to buy the 200 coffee machines. Like we made 10x that. right?
And what's
So
cool
Yeah.
about that story is that, like you were saying, it builds your brand. So those people that didn't buy right then and there, I mean, down the road, they have a good feeling about you and your software probably. And so when they are in the market to buy, you're going to be top of mind.
yeah, so I don't think Nespresso machines are the answer for everybody, but my point is people should get creative, not just, use like one of the different softwares to spam everyone in the world, like cheesy emails.
Yeah.
No value.
Yeah. Well, and if you're doing true ABM where you are building out the list of the target accounts, like ideally you're picking companies that have a good chance of working with you. And I say that because I know there's a lot of companies out there and marketers and salespeople that will be like, let's create a list for an ABM campaign. And they will put their wish list of these are the companies we'd like to work with. And of course, they're like the Fortune 10 companies. Like, yeah, you and everybody else. It must be very lucrative to be like a CMO or the head of IT or HR at like Apple or, one of those really big companies because everybody is trying to target them. And I think when you're building out these campaigns, you've got to be smart about who you put on the list. It can't just be anybody. And just because it's a big name doesn't mean that if you send them the Nespresso machine or whatever it is, that they're going to respond to it.
Two other solutions, because this is such a big problem for B2B marketers, is how to get the engagement. Is two other things that have worked really well that are different is amazing content that people really want to read. So I worked with a company 2 years ago and we decided to have $1 million per year content strategy. And we produced ebooks and research reports. And we basically distributed them to our database, but we also went to third parties, cornerstone content that really captures people. Like you need to give them like 5 to 8 pieces of content is sort of the stat to get them to feel like, wow, these guys are the experts. We need to be working for them. Sometimes you get there after one really great piece of content, but usually it takes a couple. So, take your pick. But I think that sort of a content strategy can be really amazing. And then broadly, I spent 10 years in the events industry. Like I think 30 to 40% of demand gen and B2B marketing is events. And so we're past COVID. So I think in-person events are coming back this year. I think there's been some budget challenges, but largely I've been to some events that had 10,000 people at them. So I think events are back. I think engaging with people at events is like at least a third of the equation, or it should be for a lot of companies. And that's just a more genuine way of engaging as well as like going to these conferences and industry events.
Obviously, not every marketing team has the robust budgets where they can afford to give away, a $200 incentive or throw an event that, costs $500 per person to attend. But I think, kind of some of the key takeaways that people can take from some of the recommendations that you've been giving, Eric, are really like, how do you think outside the box and get creative? And how do you connect with individuals and engage with them in a way that doesn't feel like you're selling to them, but feels like you're providing some level of value to them that gives them a reason to start to trust you or your organization and start to keep your brand top of mind so that when they are in market, they raise their hand. And if you can't afford to do some of the things, I think content, while I would love to work with $1 million budget from content, most of the time that's not an option for these smaller organizations that GrowthMode Marketing tends to work with. But start with content, even if it's small, and make it really good content. I mean, it's got to be interesting and it's got to be engaging. And, when I was looking back in my notes from our previous conversation, Eric, you had said something that I absolutely agree with, which is sometimes you go into organizations and they're like, all right, let's run with marketing. And it's like they can't even articulate how they're different and what they do. And they turn to the marketing team, whether they're working on a fractional basis with a CMO like you, Eric, or they're working with an agency like GrowthMode Marketing. They think that we can spin magic out of the story they don't know how to articulate. And it's like, it doesn't work that way. You've got to be able to nail that down or all the content in the world is going to fall flat.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to be able to tell your story in a compelling way. The one thing I would say about being able to afford marketing programs is, first, I would test everything at a smaller level before you go big. But second, I think that marketing, people always talk about marketing spend. And I always correct them and say, marketing is an investment.
Investment. Mm-hmm.
And,
Amen.
it's amazing. People are willing to spend, $2,000 in advertising on Google to acquire a customer, but they're not willing to buy someone a $500 dinner. It doesn't really make sense to me. It just tells me that people aren't really creative. They're like, oh, I'll just put my credit card on Google and spend a little bit more. Like, that's not super
Right.
creative. I'm not saying don't advertise on Google. I'm just saying that, like, the way people think about the economics is they should think about customer acquisition costs and unit economics and the money that they're investing like that, not just as like what they can afford to spend. Right. And so I think that that's the right way for companies to think about it, is test at a small level and then think about it like an investment.
As we kind of wrap up this conversation, knowing that the way buyers are buying is changing, I think marketing and sales have to work differently together. I mean, it's no longer about just tossing over MQLs to the sales team and letting them run with it. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, my advice is, instead of counting leads or MQLs or SQLs and arguing about the definitions of those, which is a whole lot of fun if you want to waste an entire afternoon, but if you don't, I think the good way to think about it is sales and marketing should be worked together to drive pipeline. So all the best companies I've worked for, that's how they can get aligned, is just, I think the majority of the work sales and marketing do should be joint. It's not about marketing doing one thing and sales doing something else. It's marketing and sales jointly drive pipeline together, and you have a goal for the pipeline, and then you have a goal for what you close in the pipeline. So a lot of people say, like, have 2 or 3 or 4x pipeline coverage, and then you'll get to the number. But I think sales and marketing working closely together to drive pipeline and then convert the pipeline, I think that's the way people get aligned. That's what I've seen across many companies.
I absolutely agree with you. I think there's a lot of marketers that are hesitant to help own the number and would rather not. But quite frankly, marketing exists to help the organization drive sales, to build brand awareness in the market. As a marketing leader, if you're not willing to own the number in conjunction with sales, you probably shouldn't be in leadership, is just my opinion. And I'm sure I'm going to get some hate mail over that. But I mean, why do we exist if we're not helping the organization move forward on that front?
I agree 100%. And I've done that, as a CMO of multiple companies. The one thing I'll add to that is just, I think it's helpful for marketing to treat sales as a customer, if you will. That sort of also drives the alignment, because in the teamwork of people working together, not us versus them, or, throwing things over the fence, like you said. I think if you look at it like that, if the sales comes and says the leads are bad, if you're treating them like a customer, you'd say, well, talk to me. Like, why are the leads bad? Are they not qualified, or the wrong contact information, or what's going on here so we can fix it? And then you do everything you can to make it right. So I think that's the right sort of approach that I really have seen be successful for a lot of companies.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. I think that we've talked a lot about that in the past too, about getting your sales team and your marketing team aligned. Just makes sense. It's common sense for every company to make sure that those teams are working together, because you all have the same goal in the end.
You want to avoid the discussions of the hole is in the other is in your side of the boat.
Yeah.
Right. Right. No more finger pointing. Let's all own it instead of pointing at each other and saying you're the problem.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. This has been a really good conversation. I love your ideas. I love the creativity that you brought to this conversation, and we will definitely be utilizing some of those ideas, whether it be in a smaller, maybe a less expensive version of it, but super fun.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on. What I always like to say is, it'll never be easy, but it should always be fun.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us on the Demand Gen Fix, a podcast for HR tech marketers, brought to you by GrowthMode Marketing. We sure hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe for more perspectives on demand generation and B2B marketing strategies. Plus, give us a like. Tell your friends. We'll see you next time.